Good morning. Hi, I'm Cody Henriksen, and we're going to be taking a look at the classes involved in the AP Celebrity Lab. So we can look at what you need to do to actually go through and work through the lab as you do the lab activities, and the kind of code you have to actually put together to make that happen. As part of this, we're going to be looking at the actual structure of the stuff, not giving the answers that you need to do to develop within your class to solve those problems, but seeing how the actual structure of the code is put together. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that right here. The first class we're going to be looking at is the Celebrity class. This is the class that's at the heart of the Celebrity Lab itself and at the heart of the Celebrity game. As you can see right here, we have a couple data members that need to be defined as part of the class itself for the clue and the answer for the base class of Celebrity. Then we have a two-parameter constructor as part of Celebrity that initializes those two data members. And as you can see right here, it's blank. It simply creates nothing that is usable. We then have getters for those two data members that are along there of getClue and getAnswer. As you can see right there, they're returning null because you need to override the code with the appropriate values that need to go inside that. We have a couple stubs of setter methods right here that also need to be implemented properly by you, the student, so you can actually go through and do that. And as you can see by reading through the method documentation where it updates the clue to the provided string or updates the answer to the provided string, it gives you a really good idea of what you need to be doing to actually create that solution for those two methods. And finally, inside the Celebrity class, we have our toString method, and it just provides a representation of the Celebrity object as a string. And this is where you can get a little bit of creative and actually explain what you want to do with this. This will be a great chance to do some cool things with your class on how you can actually do this. You'll also want to notice right here on the toString method, we have the @override annotation. So that @override annotation is just a nice little documentation component that explicitly says you're overriding the parent class methods. This is a great way to provide some documentation and exposure to some of the things that go beyond just the regular AP subset of information, but how you can do some code that actually I'm explicitly calling out that I know that I'm changing the base class version of toString because I don't want to get the @ gobbledygook that automatically happens when I give a toString if I just don't write my own. That's the Celebrity class, the one that's at the heart of the thing, and that's what you'll be basically writing after you complete activity 1 of the lab. The next one we're going to be working on is the CelebrityGame.java. So the CelebrityGame.java class is the next one that's in there. As you can see right here, the CelebrityGame file has a few more data members that we'd have to be working through and looking at. We have a reference to a Celebrity subclass instance that we're going to be working with in the game itself, a GUI frame for the actual Celebrity, and an array list of Celebrity values. So those data member documentation components explain exactly what data members need to be inside the actual file as you go through that. So it's a great thing to actually look through and look at that. We have our constructor of CelebrityGame, and as you can see in the documentation comments right here, this is what's going to build the game and start the GUI. So this should be a big clue to you as to what needs to be happening as you actually work through the project itself. Then we have our prepared game. Our prepared game method reinitializes the celeb game list as necessary. You can reset the game. This would be a great way you can add a reset method that could possibly call prepared game as well. A great way to add some functionality to the game as you go through it and keep working on it. We have our process guess method where it's going to use a supplied string and then returns a true or false value based on whether it actually matches the information that's supplied as the actual answer for that Celebrity instance. Now, if you notice inside the information right here, whether it matches regardless of case or extraneous external spaces, it addresses what you need to use inside the string class to make that happen. So this is a great time to review what you know about the string API and how to use the string API to process information. So a great thing to take a look at and go from there. The next method is the play method, and as you can see right here, it's going to assert that the list itself is initialized. We want to make sure we actually have a list to play with, because if we don't have a single celebrity, we can't play the game. So that gives you a clue as to what needs to be happening inside that. And with assert, that's almost always saying that we need to have an if block attached to the code, so a great way to keep looking from that. The next step inside there, the documentation comments, it's going to set the current celebrity as the first item in the list. So we're going to use a list to get the current celebrity. So that also tells us the next step we need to do. And then finally, it needs to open the gameplay screen. And so that's saying, oh, hey, there's another class involved with this. We need to open the gameplay screen. And as we go through the actual project, we'll see what that takes to actually make that happen. Again, make sure you take a look and follow through with your teacher on the lab exercises of the assignment because you want to make sure you're keeping track of that. The next method we have is the addCelebrity method. The addCelebrity, as you can see, has 3 different parameters, a name, guess, and type. And for the first version of the Celebrity project, all you need to worry about is the name and the guess. The type is for the part 4 of the Celebrity Lab, so you can do some more enhancements on that using subclasses of Celebrity. And that's a great way to review some cool stuff once you get into the inheritance components and take a look at that with your teacher. We then have our validate Celebrity and validate clue methods. As you can see, these two methods are going to give some basic information. We have to have at least 4 characters. We need to make sure the celebrity itself is valid. So it's, hey, do we have enough things in there? It's using the basic idea of data validation, making sure what the user supplies to us, the program, is going to be working proper. So it gives you the idea of the clue that you need to have. If it has to have 4 or more characters, that should give you a big clue as to what needs to be in that. For validate clue, this supply clue has to have at least 10 characters, or it's a series of clues if you're working with a subclass of that. And so again, you have to worry on this one. You have to use the clue and the type to make that happen, and that's what we're working for in that. We have a getter for the size, and right now it's returning 0. However, as you can see in the reference in the documentation, it's an accessor method for the current size of the list of celebrities. And so that should give you a big clue as to what method you need to use that belongs to a list of objects. I know, it's a great big hint, but that's okay. The sendClue method is also an accessor method that retrieves the game's clue, so we can have some low coupling between the game class and the celebrity class. So we need to keep about how we can make sure that happens, and so we want to make sure how we can use the reference of the game's celebrity to the current celebrity and make that clue work on that. Then we have our sendAnswer, which will do the same basic approach to maintain that low coupling between the game class and the celebrity class. It's a way to a go-between, because we don't need to have all the information shared across all the classes. We just need to have a go-between, and that's what the celebrity game class actually does. Now, for implementing these methods, you're going to be looking at the information inside the lab exercise 2 to make that happen. And so I definitely recommend working through lab exercise 2 before you try and do all the work on this. And again, talk with your teacher, talk with your peers to make sure you understand the components that are going to be happening with this. And check to use the documentation comments, because it gives you a big clue as to what kind of information needs to happen inside that Celebrity Game class. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking at is the GUI code that goes inside this. Now, when we're talking about GUI, or graphical user interface, there's a lot of stuff that actually happens both behind the scenes and inside that. And there's a couple great things you can do to look at that and do some really cool projects with that. But we're going to look at just the basics of what we're working with here inside both the CelebrityFrame, StartPanel, and the CelebrityPanel classes that will actually make that happen. The first thing, of course, we want to start off with is look at our import statements. In our import statements, we have a couple things we're working with inside here to make this happen. We have an import java.awt.cardLayout, javax.swing.jframe, and javax.swing.jpanel. Now, you'll notice that the card layout on my screen right now has a yellow underline of uselessness. That's because on the student version, I haven't given the... That's because on the student version, you don't have the code yet that implements that import explicitly at this point. You'll be adding the code to make that work in a bit. So if you see a yellow underline of uselessness or a warning on that, don't worry, you'll take care of that as you actually go through the project. We have our public class CelebrityFrame extends JFrame. If you haven't covered it already, the extends keyword is the Java's tool for inheritance, which means that CelebrityFrame now knows everything publicly that JFrame knows. It can do everything on that. And the frame is the windowing tool inside the Swing library. So this is what you use to hold the window itself. We have some data members that exist inside here. As you can see right here, data members have documentation with them as well. So there's CelebrityPanel Game Panel, a JPanel just called Panel Cards, and a StartPanel instance called StartPanel. There's a reason why we have the subclasses as well as just the default class on that. We'll be taking a look at that as we go through, especially as you go through and work with your teacher and how to go through the GUI appendix and how to go through the components that actually make it so that we have a GUI functioning in the system. We also have a data member right here called Celebrity Game Type called Controller, which is a reference we can use to send the relationships back and forth between the GUI itself, which the user sees, and the code behind the scenes that the user has no idea about. And so that's where that controller is coming in as a reference on that. So just as an FYI, that's where that's happening. If you want to look at some more information on this, look at the idea of using a model view controller relationship, and that's where that name on that is coming from. So let's go ahead and take a little further relation. Let's take a closer look at this. As you can see right here, we have our constructor. Our constructor takes a parameter of type CelebrityGame called controller reference. And so that's the reference that we're going to be sharing with the CelebrityPanel instance. We'll be using that to actually share information across using that model view controller idea that I was talking about earlier. And again, it's a way we can share information because, again, the GUI, all it knows how to handle are how to put things on the screen like, buttons and how to handle clicking and stuff like that, how to show text and pictures on the screen. It doesn't have any idea about what the game is, and it doesn't want to know about that. And so that's how we are handling it, by having a reference to that. The first line that we have inside our CelebrityFrame is a reference to the super constructor. Now, as you can see right here, we have super, open and close parens, followed by our semicolon, which means we're calling the default constructor, which, although it's implicitly handled by Java, it's really good explicit to call out anytime you're using a subclass to always explicitly call the parent class's constructor on your own, which means you know exactly what you're doing with that. So it's a great way to get in practice on that, and it's always a good thing to do also for, especially on AP questions that deal with a inheritance thing, is make sure you call the correct parent class constructor. In this case, it's super with open and closed parens. Now, as you can see right here in the documentation of our CelebrityFrame constructor, that it builds an instance of CelebrityFrame with a reference to CelebrityGame instance. And so that means automatically we should be using that reference that's a parameter, doing something with the data member. You might have had some practice with doing something with parameters and data members in the past. And this is a great time to remember, oh yeah, that's what we do. Now, there's some other information that has to be happening with this, and we'll get some clues for that as we read through the rest of the file. But also, again, work with your teacher and going through this teacher's version of the code or via the GUI appendix. They'll be working with you on that. We have a helper method right here, a private helper method, which obviously means it can only be called internal to the class, and it's a great one we can use to help set up the frame. Oh, there's another big clue for that right there. This can configure the Windows subclass and add the panel and set size-based information. So the setupFrame method is what's going to be used to actually make sure that the frame itself looks the way we want it to and performs appropriately. Now, if you take a look at the checklist of things that you need to do inside this on what you have to actually make that happen, there's a checklist that talks about this. You can check a look at that on my Twitter feed or inside the notes for this video. You can see information about how you can actually, what you have to do to make that happen. That's a great thing you can do. Oh, I did all the pieces? Yes, I'm good to go. The next thing we have is a public method, one that's going to be called externally because it's public, that can swap screens using the approach of that card layout approach of the card panel we have up here as this data member, the panel cards data member. The method right here of replace screen uses the string parameter to decide which of the screens that panel is going to hold, which screen to show on the actual window itself. And so that's what we're going to be working with on making that happen. And again, check with your teacher or the GUI libraries to see what you need to do to make that happen. It's also talked about inside of activity 3 of the actual lab exercise itself. And that's what we're going to be working with on that. The next one we're going to be looking at are the components that go inside the frame. So again, a frame itself is just the holder for what we're working with, the externally part of the thing. The panels themselves are what we actually do to work with the contents that the user will be interacting with the most often. And so sort of the start panel and the celebrity panel come into play. The first one we'll be working with is the start panel at Java. That's the first screen that will be showing to the user when they open up the CelebrityGame. As we look at this again, it extends JPanel, which means StartPanel knows everything that JPanel knows and then some because it's a custom subclass. So you can do cool stuff with that. We have some data members we can see right here. So if we look at the data members, we have a CelebrityGame controller reference. So we have a reference to the game itself, so we can call the methods that go along with that, which we saw earlier as a parameter to the constructor of our frame class. We have a SpringLayout, which is the layout management tool that we're using inside this panel. We have a button group, which as you can see, it's a logical container for radio buttons to guarantee that only one is selected. So that's how radio buttons know which one to be clicking on. And we named it the amazing name of type group. We have a JRadio button called Celebrity Radio button, as well as a JRadio button called Literature Radio. And then we have a customized parameter for your own created subclasses. You know, like, oh, if I want to make my own subclass, here's some pre-built documentation to go along with that as well. We have a JLabel for a clue label and a JLabel for celebrity count label we're using to actually store information about what is happening inside the game to the user. And then we have a text field for the answer field and clue field, so we can get the information from the user, a way to type into that. That's what text fields are for. The next couple data members we have inside here, we have a private J button add celebrity button, a private J button start button. Just like when the name itself, a button or a J button, that means that they're going to be used as a button click. So we're going to actually click on them to make something happen. So that's what those are used for right there. We have a celebrity clue, which is a string we can use to populate the clue label if they select the celebrity option, or a literature clue if they're going to choose the literature option from that radio button. Or if you have your own custom subclass, you want to make a data member string of that type right there that you can put for your own custom subclass, like, oh, here's the clue to do to make sure that happens. The next thing we have in data members of string count label text and in celebrity count, these are some references to what we'll be working with inside the actual celebrity label itself, so we can actually use that to pre-build some answers and make that happen. And so we can have that be able to show information to the user by having some pre-built strings to go along with that and a count that we can use that we can reference across the actual class. Finally, let's go ahead and take a look at the constructor for this. And the constructor is a bit of a pile of code right here, so let's maximize this a bit more. As you can see right here within the start panel, we have our documentation that says we're going to construct a start panel with a reference to the game passed as a parameter to be used as a data member. And then again, the app_param controller, which is reference to the game. Again, we have our public start panel, the public start panel. There's no return type because it's a constructor, so we don't obviously have that. It takes as a parameter a CelebrityGame reference, and then CelebrityGame controller is the name of the controller's name of that. As you can see, we have our first line being super parens because we're calling our parent class constructor just like we saw as our default option inside the CelebrityFrame class. We then have an assignment to our data member, this.controller equals controller. So I'm saying that the controller that's the parameter, I'm assigning to one that belongs to the current instance of the class. And that's what we're doing with the this.reference right here. So we're assigning the parameter in green to this.controller in blue. So we're saying, oh, I'm talking about this one, I'm assigning to this one. So I have that reference that I can use one time only for the entire game. So I'm passing that as a reference right there. The panel layout is a new SpringLayout. That's the layout management tool we're using so we can have some springs so that things can be certain distances away from all the different components we're working with. We have that type group, which is, as I said, is the button group. And that's what we use to actually hold all the radio buttons so you can only click on one at a time because for some reason radio buttons work best when you only click on one of them. Hey, that makes sense. We initialize our Celebrity Radio button and our Literature Radio buttons as a new JRadio button, passing it a string of what kind we want to say for that. As you can see with the JRadio button option, it's just simply a new and then whatever type it is with a string parameter, which is what the string that's going to be attached to that radio button explicitly right there. So it's like, oh, this is the radio button, this is the label that goes built into it for that radio button itself. We have a clue that we're initializing for Celebrity Clue and for Literature Clue, those strings that we have up there in our data member section. So enter the clue for Celebrity, enter the clues, plural, for Literature Celeb, separated by commas. That gives the user of the program what they should be doing when they select the different options. We have this.clue label as a new J label, and we pass it as its parameter. Instead of a default string, we pass it the string we just supplied of Celebrity Clue. So it means it automatically initializes that value with that pre-initialized information. Then we have a couple more data members. We have this.answer field as a new JText field, type celebrity name here, 4 letters minimum, thanks share. Because again, we want to talk about, we have an idea of some logic with this. We want to make sure that happens. This.clue field is a new JText field again, also with a value of enter celebrity clue, 10 letters minimum. This.add celebrity button is a new J button, and again, add the current celebrity. So again, with all the J components, it's simply just a new J component name thing, and followed by parens and a string that describes what you're going to put inside that actual component. This.start button is a new J button saying start CelebrityGame. We initialize our variable at 0. Yes, I know ints have a default value of 0, but it's always good to explicitly initialize all your data members explicitly when you're creating your objects. This.count label text is current celebrity count and a colon and space. Then we use the concatenation operator, aka the plus sign, to put the celebrity count in with that as well. And then this.celebrity count label, we're going to initialize that as a new J label, passing it that newly constructed string of count label text. So we're using our start panel to initialize all of the data members we had listed up above, and using some of the data members that we've already initialized to initialize other data members as we go through. The last 3 lines of our StartPanel constructor are the calls to the helper methods we'll be using to make the actual panel be organized and structured. So we have setupPanel, setupLayout, and setupListeners. And these 3 methods are what we use to actually organize the GUI inside a subclass of JPanel so we can organize the information. But those are the methods that are called at the end of the constructor, so they happen automatically when the object is created, and so that the panel itself is ready to be viewed as soon as it's actually created as an object. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one, setupPanel. So the first of those GUI helper methods is setupPanel. As you can see right here in the student code, it's empty. You need to actually create that method yourself. There's some code you have to add to it, but the idea behind it, you have to go ahead and add all the components to the start panel and use the SpringLayout variable as its layout manager. So by doing that, you want to make sure you take a look at what that needs to be done. Again, either using the GUI appendix or working with the teacher and the teacher's code. Or again, if you check a look at the actual checklist, you can get an idea of the components that need to happen inside the start panel with that in the student checklist that's posted in the Twitter feed or as a comment inside this as well. The setupLayout method uses the SpringLayout's constraints to organize where the visual components are set inside the panel. And so everything is grouped together based on the type of information it's using. As you can see right here, all of the lines start with panelLayout.putConstraint, followed by the parameters of a direction, a component, a distance, another direction, and the other component. When we're talking about these component relationships right there, the first one is if we take a look at that first line right there on 189 on my screen, we say that the panel layout is put in constraint. That's on the west constraint of clue label. It's going to be 0 away from the west edge of Celebrity Radio. So the clue label is tied on the west edge, the left edge, to Celebrity Radio with a gap of 0. The panel also put a constraint on there on the north edge of Celebrity Radio is going to be 15 away from the north edge of this. And in this case, this refers to the panel itself. So the Celebrity Radio's north edge is going to be 15 away from the north edge of the panel. So you go down 15, and that's where the radio panel will be. When you're adding your own components in that, you want to use the framework provided by lines 202 and 203 right here, where it's saying panelLayout.putConstraint of SpringLayout.north Literature Radio 10 and SpringLayout.south, Celebrity Radio, as well as panelLayout.putConstraint, SpringLayout.west Literature Radio 0, and SpringLayout.west and Celebrity Radio. So you can have a vertical alignment 10 gaps away each time for every subclass of Celebrity you're working with. And basically all you need to do when you're doing your subclasses of that is put some, duplicate that structure, but move it 10 down from the one below it. So every time it just goes 10 down, in this case, Literature Radio is 10 from the north edge of Literature Radio, is 10 away from the south edge of Celebrity Radio. So your custom subclass would be, the north edge of it would be 10 away from the south edge of Literature Radio, and so on. And that's where you make the added components to make that setup layout work for your own structure as well. The last helper method is called from the constructor itself is the setupListeners helper method. The setupListeners helper method is what we use to attach listeners to each of the GUI components so we can make the GUI components do something when we click on them, drag them, select them, etc. And so that's how we're going to make this happen. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on inside this actual method, and so we can use this to enhance and do more things as we go through this. As you can see right here, we have some documentation comments at the top of Start button. So we have Start button.addActionListener. It makes a new action listener, open and close parens. And then a set of squigs, and inside that set of squigs, we have public void action performed, action event mouse click. And inside those squigs, we have controller.play. So when we're doing this, what we're working with on this line is we're creating an action listener anonymously, then we're attaching it to the Start button and saying, hey, whenever you click the Start button, we want you to call the controller's play method. So what we're doing right there is that we're making, whenever I click that button, it's going to go and call that method. And we attach this at the beginning inside the constructor so that whenever that we have created any GUI components, all of those different components are initialized properly and also have the correct listeners attached to the component. So whenever the component gets used inside the program, it calls the appropriate method when it needs to. And so we attach that with using a method right there, and so that's where controller.play happens. On the Add Celebrity button, we again add a new action listener. It's a new action listener is the parameter we send to that. We then have the open and close squigs. Then we say public void action performed. And again, in this case, because it is an interface, spelling really matters. It needs to be explicitly called public void action performed, not preformed, not performed, or anything like that. You also have to have a parameter that's of an action event type. The name of it doesn't really matter. I use mouse click because it talks about exactly what it is, but that's what we're going with that. The next thing we do is we're going to set the answer field and the clue field's backgrounds to white, saying, hey, I've collected that information. We then call the validate method we'll take a look at here in a minute, passing it the answer field's text and the clue field's text. If that result is true, if passing those two parameters returns true, we'll call the addToGame method. However, if that validate method returns false, we will call the invalid input method and go from there. Regardless of that, regardless of the event of the validate, we call the celebrity count update to set control.get celebrity game size. So we update the celebrity game size based on the results of that. And we also update the celebrity count label to be the count label's text plus the current celebrities count. So we can say, oh, this is how many celebrities are currently inside the game. We then have two other listeners that are a little bit different. They're using the Java 8 Lambda style structure, so we can actually do a little bit more with that. And because the literature radio selection listeners are also action listeners, but they have a lot less code attached to them, I decided to demonstrate a little more that we can do with that. And so in this case, literatureradio.addActionListener, we type in the word select because that's what we're doing is we're selecting it. Again, the variable name doesn't matter, but give it something that makes sense so you know what you're doing later on. We then use an arrow operator, the minus and then a greater than sign together. And so select is going to direct its actions to what? It's to direct its actions to cluelabel.setText, passing it the literature clue. And the same thing happens if I interact with a celebrity radio button. I'll add an action listener to it, then select arrow cluelabel.setText and pass it celebrity clue. If you are doing a subclass of your celebrity project for your lab level 4, you do the same thing. And so if you're a custom celebrity radio.addActionListener, and then select arrow operator cluelabel.setText custom celebrity clue parens semicolon. So you can see what that happens. So let's do a nice little cool thing. Take a look at what that means and how the Java Lambda syntax works in another video or some other resources out there. But that's what we're doing inside the setupListeners methods. We're attaching listeners to all the GUI components so that stuff will happen when we interact with it as a user. And so that's the last of the methods that are called by the constructor. However, we take a look at the other components inside here. The next one we have is the validate method. The validate method, as you can see in the documentation right here, is going to create a celebrity instance based on what's happening. And so it checks to make sure that we have at least 4 characters. So we have a validate, takes a string parameter answer text and a string parameter clue text. It defaults the valid clue and valid answer local variables as false because we want to assume they're not working properly. We then check if we're selecting literature radio or whether we're using just the default value with that. And that's why we have a default value going as the second parameter of validate clue. And as you can see right here, we are sending the logic off to the controller. Then we have to check to see if answer text.length is greater than 4. Now, at least 4 characters. Now, on that, we might have a little thing we might have to adjust because answer text.length is greater than 4. That's not at least 4. Maybe it's about to change. Based on that result, that if block, we'd set valid answer to be control.validate celebrity, passing answer text. We then use the power of Boolean logic, returning valid clue and valid answer. And so if either of them are false, it automatically will set that return to being false, and nothing will come back from that as positive, so we'll return false on that. However, if both the valid clue and valid answer values are true, true and true returns true, and we're good to go and we can move on. The next 2 methods that are part of the StartPanel class that are already supplied to you are the invalid input and addToGame methods. Invalid input gets called if the validate method returns false. As you can see right here, it says, oh, I'm going to set the text to be type in celebrity and the background color to red. Same thing for clue field. It set the text to type in a clue and set its background to red. So if you do it wrong, it's going to warn the user what is wrong about it so you can actually move on from that. The flip side, we have the private void addToGame helper method, and that private void addToGame method says that the default value of the type will be celebrity. If literature radio is selected, the type will then be literature. And we then set the string answer as the answer field.getText.trim. And so answer field.getText goes to the text field and grabs all the text out of that text field, and then we use the string method trim to wipe out any extraneous spaces on both the front or the end of that, because we don't want to have extra spaces on that because it'd be impossible for a user to guess that. The same thing happens on the clue. We're going to go to cluefield.getText and then call .trim on that, so you can wipe off any of the blanks that are on either side of that answer. We then reset the answer field value to be a blank value. The clue field will be a blank value as well. We then tell the controller, hey, controller, add a celebrity passing it the answer, the clue, and the type, which is implemented inside the CelebrityGame class. Finally, we say now that we've added something to the game, the start button can be played, and so start button is enabled to be true. So we can actually access the game at this point. And so that's what we're going for inside the StartPanel game, that you have to do a little bit of code to add up to make that work. The last class we want to take a look at inside the Celebrity project is the CelebrityPanel class. As you can see, we have a bunch of imports that go along with this. We have import javax.swing.asterisk. We import everything from the Java Swing library at the root level. We import java.abt.event.actionListener and action event. We also import java.abt.color and java.abt.font, so we can have some color and font manipulation inside that as well. Our class header, again, starts off with public class CelebrityPanel extends JPanel, because, again, this is a subclass of JPanel, so we can do everything that JPanel can do, but more, because we want to make it even more amazing. And then we have a whole bunch of data members, so we'll scroll down and take a look at those. The first set of data members we have are some of our J components. We have a J button for guest button, a J button for reset button, a J label for guest label, J label for start static timer label, a J label for dynamic timer label, a timer object, as well as an action listener called timer listener, and a scroll pane called clue pane. And again, if you take a look at the documentation comments on that, it gives a little bit more information about that. We then have a JText area called clue area, a JText field called guest field, a SpringLayout like we used inside our start panel to handle the layout management of the actual screen itself, a string called success, a string called try again, and finally a private int called seconds and a reference to our controller so we can send information back and forth using that same model view control relationship we're working with throughout the entire project. And so that's what we have for our data members right there. Let's go take a look at the constructor that goes along with this. Inside the CelebrityPanel's constructor, you can see right here that we have a bunch of code that's happening with that. It starts off again with a first as a call to super. We then initialize our data member, passing it the parameter with this.controller equals controller. So we're assigning our data member right there so we can have the same individual reference for one object throughout the entire game itself. We then set our panel label as a new SpringLayout. Our guest label is a new guest label, passing it to the string. Guess, I know, amazing. Static timer label is a new J label, timer main colon, then a space, because again, when string concatenation happens, we want to make sure that we have a space for things to happen. A dynamic timer label is a new J label, passing it 60 to start off with. Guess button has a button with submit guess. Reset button, start again. Clue area is a default text of nothing, followed by 30 and 20 for the parameters right there that handle how wide and how tall it should be. We have a clue pane, which is a new J scroll pane, passing it clue area. Guess field is a new JText field, and we pass it the inner guess here, comma 30, saying, hey, this is what we want to put in here as the default value and how wide it should be by default. We have a success string and a try again string. You have chosen correctly, and then \n for a new line. Next celebrity clue is, and followed by a space. And then try again, you've chosen poorly. Try again, \n, the clue is, repeating the clue. And so we have this .seconds is initialized to 60 because, again, we initialize all of our data members appropriately. And then this .countdown timer is initialized as a new timer, passing a reference of 1000, and the timer listener, so it can actually be, here's the listener we'll be working with inside the actual structure. Just like inside our StartPanel class, we have 3 GUI helper methods of setupPanel, setupLayout, and setupListeners. Our helper method for setupPanel, as you can see right here, adds all the components to the panel, and you can adjust GUI settings. And this would be a great one to look at for reference when we're talking about the StartPanel as well, because CelebrityPanel does all the information for us. So inside private void setupPanel, we do this .setLayout to install the layout manager as our for the panel itself by passing it the panel layout. We then add all the components to the panel itself using this .add. So we pass in all the components we specified that were GUI components inside there of guest label, clue pane, guest field, guest button, reset button, dynamic timer label, and static timer label. We then want to do a little bit of work to make things look a little bit nicer. So we're going to say static timer label has a set font of Helvetica in bold and 20. Same thing with our dynamic timer label, so it's just a little bit bigger than default. We want to make sure we have some scrolling happen so our app actually can keep track of what we're doing. So we set clue pane to set horizontal scroll bar policy to scroll bar never for horizontal, but vertical scroll bar policy is vertical as needed. We then set our clue area to be line wrapped by using wrap style word true and line wrap true. And then we don't want the user to actually touch the clue area, so we set the clue area to editable to be false, because that way the user has no way to interact with the actual clue area. They only interact with the actual area they're showing with a little text field to type in. And that's what we're doing inside the setupPanel helper method. The next helper method is setupLayout. And again, the setupLayout method is where we go to control where things are inside the screen. And as you can see, every single line starts with panelLayout.putConstraint, and it says where all the different components are going to be. In the case of the first 4 lines, we're talking about the clue pane. It's going to be 15 away from the north edge. It's going to be 15 away from the west edge. It's going to be negative 100 away from the south edge. And its east edge is also negative 15 away from the east edge. So it's going to be in the middle of it, and right 15 away, 15 away, 15 away, and a negative 100 away from that. So that's where it's describing where it's going to be. And this is something you can take a look at and how you can do some more GUI arrangements, but that's more on the idea of user experience and user design. And that's something that we're not going to be covering as much as part of this actual project. We can do some cool stuff with later. We then have our setupListeners again. Just like in the previous class, the setupListeners method is where we're going to do all sorts of work to make things happen. And just like inside the start panel, the setupListeners, each individual GUI component has a listener attached to it, so it does exactly what it is supposed to do. And so reset button to add action listener, it makes a new action listener, and it calls the play method when it's ready. Same thing with guest button, adds a new action listener. Again, inside its action performed, it calls updateScreen. We attach an action listener as well to the text field. The text field action listener, instead of listening for a button click, it listens for an interpress. And so I named the parameter on that interpress because that's exactly what we're doing with right there. And then we call updateScreen yet again. The countdown timer takes an action listener. It's a new action listener right here. So every time the countdown timer has something happen, it's going to call timerFires. And then after we do that, we tell the countdown timer to start, which means the timer itself actually starts running at that point after the setupListeners method is called. So, it's going to start counting seconds down one at a time at that point. The timerFires method is what we call right inside there. And so the timerFires helper method, as you can see, we start off with using seconds minus minus. So we're going to take 1 away from seconds every time that method occurs. If seconds is less than or equal to 10, we're going to change our label to being a bold and red instead of being bold and black. However, if seconds becomes less than 0, then, time's up. We have to stop. We'll set our text to be 0 again, set the seconds, reinitialize that back to 0, tell our timer to stop, tell the guest button to be enabled as false, and the guest field also be enabled to be false. You can't press enter, nor can you actually click the submit guest button anymore because the game's over. Finally, as our default course of action, if the timer is not in those cases, we're going to update the timer label to be the set text of dynamic timer label. Finally, if it's not less than 0 or 10, we're going to automatically go through and say how many seconds are left so we can keep track of how many seconds are left so we can update the time that's displayed to the user at that point. And that's what we're doing inside the timerFires. Our addClue method, once we're going to add a clue to this, we're going to go ahead and, as you can see, we adds a clue to the screen from the game's instance. So we're going to go to the clue area, set the text. The clue is clue, which is passed as a parameter. So this method is going to be called externally. We're going to update the seconds to be 0 because we're starting as a brand new clue at this point. The dynamic timer label set foreground is going to be black. The countdown timer will be restarting because we're adding a new clue. So we now have another minute to guess for this. The static timer label will initialize that to time remaining so it can initialize that value. Set the guest button enabled to be true and the guest field enabled to be true so we can actually play the game. The updateScreen method is only called inside the panel class, so it's going to be a private method. It gets called when we either click a button to submit a guest or go from there. We're going to retrieve the guest as current guest from the guest field, grabbing the text from that. We're going to send the clue area, say you guessed this value, append puts it at the end of the text area. Then we're going to set the controller, hey, process this guess. Get what the user typed in and see if it's correct or not. If it is true, we're going to make it be cyan, and then we'll append that in there. If it's false, however, we're going to set the color back to white. We'll add the try again screen. We'll add the try again message as well, and then append the controller, hey, controller, give us back the clue, whether it's a new clue or the same clue again, so the user can keep on playing. Finally, we have a new if block. If the controllers get celebrity game size to 0 if we're at the end of the game, then there's no more celebrities to guess. We can't play the game anymore, so we disable the guess button in the guess fields. And finally, the last line we're going to do is going to use clue area.setCaretPosition, and we're going to say the caret, aka the cursor, move that down to the very bottom, which means that the game itself will scroll down as we go through the game. So that's what we're doing with inside that updateScreen method, make that happen. As you can see right there inside the Celebrity panel, we have a bunch of methods we worked on to do that, to make that happen. The Celebrity panel class will give you a lot of information you need to do to make the StartPanel class work properly. Again, make sure you take a look at all the components that exist inside the data members section and how the data members are put together inside the setupPanel method to make sure that works, so you can make sure that is a functional thing. You want to make sure you take a look at the CelebrityFrame class with your teacher so you can see what needs to be going inside that, so you can finish completing those methods that are part of that as you work through that component right there. And finally, the last class we have to really look at is the CelebrityRunner. Right now, nothing happens, but if you take a look at the project, what is the main heart of the actual structure of the game? That's what you need to create. Take a look at the documentation comments. It gives you a really big clue as to what needs to go inside that main method to make that happen. Keep working at this, do some great stuff, and hope you have a great time with the Celebrity Lab. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.